Hey, it's Tony D with a hot take. How you doing? So today's hot take expands upon what I said yesterday about being wary. Um, the big news today is Project Veritas exposing CBS News as basically making up a news story. Basically, now they're denying it, but there's some evidence to suggest they may not have totally clean hands in this. Um, I'll surmise it for you. Link in the description. Um, CBS News, I think the local affiliate, went to cover a hospital in Michigan, and they wanted to cover the beer virus testing. So they wanted a line of cars for the segment and people being swabbed and the whole bit. And they didn't have it, so they set it up. So they set it up with the hospital workers. There were a couple of actual patients in line, but most of them apparently were hospital workers. And it was sort of the show, hey, oh, this is still going on. The hospital's still needed, everybody, blah, 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 worry. Well, now it turns out that they staged a lot of that. And it's because one of the hospital workers themselves actually exposed what they did. And that's not good. I mean, that gives you the wrong impression, right? So we're here in South Jersey dealing with the beer virus, and they're trying to sell us on, well, it's still pretty bad, and it's going up in New Jersey. It's still going up. The numbers here in South Jersey are much, much lower than the numbers in North Jersey. The North Jersey numbers are in the thousands. The South Jersey numbers are in the hundreds. So it's a big difference. It's a big difference. And but it goes along with what I said about being wary. You have to be very wary of these news organizations because they are lying to you, because they have a reason to lie. They have a financial incentive to lie. If they lie to make things worse than it is, you will tune in. So I was just in my previous video talking about, or in the Piney Podcast video, talking about NBC 10, and the headline is something about Phil Murphy and hundreds die. Hundreds, that's technically true. Technically. But it's also true that in the bigger scheme of things, the beer virus is only slightly worse than influenza, the flu, and other things. It's also true that evidence suggests that some of the numbers are being inflated for monetary reasons because there's a financial incentive to say you have beer virus patients. And there's also just straight up laziness on the part of people doing this because they're also worried about getting infected and they don't want to necessarily do a super long investigation of someone whose body might be riddled with disease that they could catch. So you should be very wary. And now you got to be careful because I have a friend who's kind of going down the YouTube rabbit hole a bit and he's sending me videos every day. And yeah, some of them you should consider, but you have to be wary of those videos because they come from the other end. There are people who are conspiracy theorists who, maybe they're well-meaning, but they're also guys who want to believe the lizard people have taken us over. They want to believe certain things. And just like the big-time news organizations that decide on a narrative and then find news to fit that narrative, the conspiracy theorists do that from a different angle. The big-time news guy says, well, we have to find news that makes this beer virus looks worse, and then they go out and they look for news like, here's something, okay, we'll report on this. The conspiracy theorists say, well, we got to find something that ties 5G to beer virus, and then they run out and they find some birds dying near a giant telephone pole, and then they go, aha! But you have to take in more than just that, and you have to, in news, you're supposed to have at least two confirmed sources, confirmed, reliable sources. So you either have to have, a guy who might come to you and say, hey, I think people are faking this news story. You can't just take him at his word. You have to find another person to say, yeah, he's right. Or you have to find corroborating evidence like a video showing that. And then you have to look at the video and say, well, could he have faked this? Are these real people? And then you go online and you find, you find that the hospital workers in the video are real people. They work at a real hospital. He works there too. He knows these people. He confirms certain facts. You got to know enough facts to say, okay, this actually happened. Because there are crazy people out there who just want to be on the news. There are people with agendas who want to put forth news. And then there are people who are actually actively looking to tear down, especially an organization like Project Veritas, which is politically leaning. You have to be very wary of that. I used to send out press releases to, back in the print days, for my comic books, right? So I'd write up a press release. I figured out how to do it. And I said, okay, I will announce, this issue of the Jersey Devil and what happens. And I would send it. Now, this is comic book news, so take that with a grain of salt. But it's, a microcosm. So I'd send out the press release, and they just print it sometimes. They would just print it verbatim. No one ever called me. No one emailed me to even, say, are you actually making this comic? I had no confirmation, at least from my end. Now, they might have called the printer or the distributor, maybe, to get confirmation, but no one called me, and I was the one who sent them the press release. And I put my contact info there specifically for that purpose. I expected calls, but I never got calls. I got people who would just reprint things that I sent them via email. Same thing happened with local news reporters. I had a news reporter. I think I told the story before, but I love it. I had a series of news reports who every time they interviewed me for the Jersey Devil comic book, they would find out my age. They would find out that I lived at home, and they would always put in the article, Tony DiGerolamo, age 30, who lives with his parents, has put out this comic. And I was just like, why the hell does that make a difference in the article? That's really annoying. So after about 5 or 6 times of this happening, I sat down with, I believe it was the Philadelphia Inquirer. And the reporter seemed to be very nice. And I said to her, listen, every time someone does a report on me, they always mention my age. And then in the same sentence, they mention that I live with my parents. Could you please not do that? I don't see how it's relevant to the news story at all. I'm not a special needs kid. I was just a guy who happened to be living at home making a comic book. So, sure enough, she says, oh yeah, no problem. The story ran. Not only did she do that, but she made a bunch of other factual errors in the article, and just generally it was a poorly written piece. And I sent her like an angry email. I'm like, how the F did you mess this up? I mean, it was terrible. Now, it could have been her editor. It could have just been her being lazy and stupid. I don't know. But the point of all this is, reporters are vulnerable to certain things. Mark Dice, for those of you who watch YouTubers, he has written books on Operation Mockingbird. He's written books about the media, I should say. And one of the chapters, he just read it on his YouTube channel, was about Operation Mockingbird. And Operation Mockingbird was a real CIA project where the CIA infiltrated news organizations throughout the United States in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It wasn't until the Church Commission in the 70s that they confronted the CIA on this and told them to stop. And you can decide whether or not you think they've stopped. The CIA has been known to lie to Congress before and eavesdrop on Congress even. And it was funny that he said in his book that Anderson Cooper actually was training to be in the CIA, and then he decided to be a journalist. And isn't that very interesting that he ended up on CNN? But, so there is a history of people who want to manipulate what you see and what you think you know. So, and certainly that happened during September 11th. That totally happened. There was all kinds of calling out of, let's go to war, kind of ignoring that. And I'm not justifying the actions of these guys, but there was a lot of buildup to that. It wasn't just one day these guys got up and decided to attack us. There was a whole preamble to that, which didn't help. Okay, let's say it definitely made that event more likely, and to ignore that is foolish. But to ignore that in the short term for propaganda purposes is not foolish, because that's how you get people to sign up. That's how you get people to sign away their rights and freedoms. That's how you get the Patriot Act, which is still a thing. That's how you get the TSA, the idiot TSA that does nothing for anybody, and it's made me never to want to ride a plane again. So it's important that we have a real media, and you can't do much as just your average person unless you happen to be one of these reporters. But you can be a discerning viewer of media, right? And I'm not saying you should, go down the rabbit hole and never look at these sources, but I'm saying you have to look at them and say to yourself, is this actually true? Are they exaggerating it? And you have to know the parameters where they're exaggerating. In television, it's about ratings, so they exaggerate tragedy. They always exaggerate tragedy. If it bleeds, it leads. If it's something that's going to kill you, they're going to jack it up. Back in the day, there was the Tylenol scare. And that was people who tampered with Tylenol, and so people all around the country threw away their pills, because God forbid, this crazy guy who had apparently poisoned a Tylenol plant, never got the whole story. Someone died, and he was terrorizing people, and that's why you have that seal top on all the pills now. So if you open your pills up and you see that seal gone, somebody tampered with your pills, and you know not to go in there, throw them away or return them or whatever. So there are scares and there are panics. A lot of people talk about the satanic panic back in the 80s, and I remember that. They would say, there are all these satanic groups out there, and they're killing children, and recruiting kids, and sometimes they use Dungeons and Dragons, and sometimes they use rock music. You look back on that now, you watch the reports, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely insane. There wasn't a rash of satanic groups across the United States, and if anything, reporting on it just made it sound like the coolest thing ever, so kids started to do it. Just not that they were really into Satan, that they would just do it to say, oh, this is cool, this is going to piss everybody off. So, you have to understand that the media has been doing this for decades. And they do it for ratings, and they do it for money, and they do it at your expense. So be a discerning consumer on your news and watch it. But, at the end of the day, go, wait a minute. When they tell you something weird, like don't wear a face mask because it's flu season, and the face mask will actually make you worse, that's when the red flag goes up, and that's when you say, wait a minute, hold on. And that's when you start digging on the internet and looking at Zero Hedge and other sources to say, there are people saying different things here. How do you resolve that? So when you hear, hey, we got to keep this lockdown going, I'm not so sure I believe that. I think, and I made that clear in the other video, the lockdown should be over. So it's time to start digging around. And even when you hear like this person shot that person, or, especially when it's connected to any kind of thing that's political, you should be very, very critical of it, very, very wary. If it's weather, even weather. I mean, they've been wrong about the weather, right? I remember, it was like 3 hurricanes ago. They predicted like a hurricane was going to hit South Jersey. Oh man, we battened down the hatches here, and I tied up the trash cans because I thought trash cans didn't even blow. I didn't even lose a trash can lid. So every time you feel panicked about the news, just remember the weather is not always right either, and you should be doing your own research if it's really important to you, or if you're really scared, because doing that research can educate you and make you feel like, oh, wait a minute, they're making too big a deal, or maybe they're going down the wrong path. And really now, I see a lot of citizen journalists who are doing the job that big media conglomerates used to do. They used to go out and go after, say, car mechanics who were ripping people off, or, you know, construction workers who would rip people off. And they would go and do these undercover things, and people would see them exposed. And for a while, that was great ratings. But then it became too expensive. Now you've got guys on YouTube doing it, and other places like BitChute and mine. So, you know, you got to look at them with a wary eye too. But you should at least be consuming a bigger meal of this discernible news. You know, and you shouldn't just trust me either. You know, because I get stuff wrong all the time. Nah, not all the time, but I get things wrong. You know, I get a facts mixed up. You know, some of the numbers I reported were like, well, by the end of the day, they were higher or whatever. You know, I'm not trying to tell you wrong news, but, you know, I make mistakes, and so do these people. The difference is most of them aren't super invested. They're more invested in their careers at the top. They care more about their, you know, when you get like a guy like Chris Cuomo, in my mind, he's more worried about his house in the Hamptons than he is about his career at CNN. He's got millions and millions of dollars. He gets paid $50,000 a show. I mean, he's got to have enough money now that, he could just call it quits, retire, write books, and, you know, sit in the Hamptons and have a great time. I certainly would consider doing that. You know, and he's from a famous family. He's got all sorts of connections. If he got bored, he could always go into politics or whatever. That's a guy who, in my mind, doesn't really have a vested interest in news because he's kind of disconnected from the rest of us. He doesn't need anything. He's going to be fine. Through this whole thing, he's going to be fine. He's not going to lose his fortune. He's going to be fine. So we need people who are a little more connected, and that's what I think citizen journalists do. So I think you should, you know, include them in your intellectual diet, let's say. All right, that's it for me. We'll see you next time.